What is up, guys? This is episode 2. If you guys didn't check out episode 1, go back. Not yet. Finish this episode. So after this one, go back to episode 1 and to fully get some context of what we are talking about. So this is the second season of Counterculture Podcast. So first and foremost, thank you for tuning in, and let's get this thing going, Anthony.
Yeah, guys, if you guys are, maybe you didn't read the title and you just clicked. We titled this episode The Force Behind Evil. And what we've been talking about is not only the person behind it all,
Right.
but what is the theological view of not only practical handles of how we can identify and unmask the enemy, know your enemy. I think that was like Green Day, right? Some old punk rock band. But, no one listens to punk rock, right? Anyways, so what we are aiming for is this idea to not only unmask our enemy, but live and approach the enemy with practical handles.
Right.
What we're going to talk about is we're going to go by and we're going to talk about one of the most, I think, culturally relevant terms that I think all of us are aware of. And it's this thing known as fake news. Anybody? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, fake news. I could try to think of some sports articles. Some
Fake news,
different stuff.
bad reporters,
Mhm.
skepticism. This all really roots CNN, Fox News. Maybe if you're a CNN person, I don't know. I'm not trying to start a political argument, but hey,
Let's not go there.
we love you no matter you're a Democrat, Independent, or Republican.
Whatever
We
you
welcome
choose.
every person.
We do.
Now, I was actually reading this post, and it was by the Washington Post, and I want to quote the column writer so that I don't get in trouble here. But column writer Glenn Kessler, if you guys are wanting to check this
Say that
out.
3 times fast.
Yeah, right. So the Washington Post, I'm not too sure how biased they are, but apparently they decided to take track and note of every false claim that President Donald Trump said. And ironically enough, they came out with this result that Donald Trump in his first year came out with 2,140 false claims. And so I think there's this idea. I mean, President Trump made the name so famous, fake news, fake news, fake news. Our culture is really screaming and backlashing anything that really we present as truth.
Right.
Everyone takes it with a grain of salt. There's always this skepticism. There's always this thing of fake news. How can we trust our politicians? Can we trust our pastors?
Sure.
Can we trust our professors? Who can you really trust in an age we live in and operate under skepticism? And so really what we want to break down is that, we understand that we're really behind. I'll just say it that much. We're really behind because
this day and age, are you saying?
Exactly, because the biblical authors
Yeah.
and even Jesus himself, they actually spent a good quality amount of time teaching against deception, teaching against false teachers, teaching against, in other words, the wolf in sheep's clothing, right? And a deceptive, imagery of someone who is out to kill you coming off as this very, weak and cuddly creature like a sheep.
Would you compare it to a Pharisee?
I wouldn't too much say a Pharisee, but we could definitely say that it's along the lines of some religious leaders in our modern day and age. So Jesus, he actually taught about our ability to believe and our ability to trust in him. But what I want to say is this: is that last week what we did was we broke down all the different ways and all the different things that we think of when it comes to the devil. I shared last week a story about a friend who thought the devil was out slashing his tires and the devil was out making him sleep in. But ironically, I shared that those things, your bad dreams, your demonization, your all these different things that you might feel that the devil is doing in your life, those are second tier, third tier, and even fourth tier. And in comparison to what Jesus teaches us is his main strategy. And this main strategy that he uses is his ability to lie. Jesus actually calls him the father of lies, and he says that is actually his native language is lies. And so what I want to say is this: is that the best lies, when you really think about it, if you want to take notes, if you want to learn how to be a good liar, I mean, just write a book, quote me on this, how to be a good liar in 3 steps, right? No one's going to write a book like this. But the best lies that I find people falling into are the ones that are actually 2% truths and 98% false. And so you
Mm.
say these lies that are twisted, these lies that come at you with like a grain of salt, that they might be
Yeah.
somewhat believable, but you take that 2% and you actually believe it to be the whole truth. That could be a twisted truth. That could be a somewhat truth. That could be something that, has some slight truth in it. And what we find is that when people are lied to in that way,
Yeah.
they begin to fall for that deception. And so what we want to do to start our episode is we're going to track back. Lewis is actually going to do the honors and he's going to read again. Yep. So exciting to read the word, but he's going to read one of our main message, our main, I guess you would say main text. It's in John 8. And if you guys are tracking with me, hopefully there's going to be, a Bible app near you or a Bible, or maybe you just want to trust our voices and listen to us. But hey, check it out. It's going to be John chapter 8, verse 44.
I'm getting my Bible up as we speak. So, wait, hold on. There we go. So this is the scripture we're going to be referencing this week in this episode. It's in chapter 8 of the book of John. It says, "You are of your father, the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in truth because there is no truth in him. Where he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies."
So what I want to say is that when you read Jesus's reference, what he's referencing to is his story. It's a story that we read in Genesis 3, and Lewis is actually going to read the story for us. But
Story time.
exactly. So prior to reading the story, what I want to say is this, is that there's a lot of skepticism and a lot of disbelief in this idea called the origins of humanity. Was it a figurative writing? Was it mythology? Was it a fable? Whatever you have these preconceived notions of it being.
Sure.
But I want to say this, is that it is an ancient literature. It's an
Mhm.
ancient Near East literature. And so
Right.
it's something that we actually don't have an equivalent to in our modern day, in our modern context of, writing and literature. And so I think it's easy to write off this entire passage of scripture and then immediately write off the entire Bible. But
Mhm.
what I want to say is this, is that if you really have this, big of an argument against there being a talking snake and that bothers you so badly, I want you to remember, as I said in the last episode, that scientists and psychologists have came out with a research and study that we actually share the same intelligence and wisdom as those 30,000 years ago. And so these people that wrote the Bible, they weren't, naive and they weren't ignorant. They know that there's no such thing as a talking snake. That's not, they're not naive. They know that this is not a literal thing that happened. But what I want you to know is this, is that whether you read this as history, whether you read it as mythology, or even ancient Near Eastern, imagery of the human condition, what I want you to know is that, this story is actually, it resonates with historians, it resonates with theologians and scholars, because they know that this story till this day is the best depiction of the human heart and the human condition, and it's told in a brilliant imagery.
And that story does come to you in the first book of the Bible. And it says, "Now the serpent was more crafty than any other beast of the field that God had made. He said to the woman, 'Did God actually say, you shall not eat any of the tree of the garden?' And the woman said to the serpent, 'We may eat of the fruit of the trees in the garden.' But God said, 'You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree that is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it, lest you die.' But the serpent said to the woman, 'You will surely not die, for God knows that you will eat it of your eyes, and it will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.' So you're telling me if I eat that, I'm going to be like God? Is that what the enemy was telling her?
Yeah, this story is a little trippy, just as we just talked about. I mean, there's talking snakes, naked people, and lies going on. And I think it's important that we understand this. Just as I said before, These people that wrote this, they're writing it with an ancient Near Eastern imagery to display the human condition. Their main motive is to really show us, put the human heart, put the human condition under a microscope, zoom in to our condition as humans, and to show us how easily we're able to buy into the lie. Because what's important is that Satan, what he does is he doesn't come to Eve with a weapon. He doesn't come to her with a bomb. He doesn't come with her with like a death threat. But what he does is he comes
Something that's appetizing.
exactly. He comes at her with an idea, but
Right.
not just a construct, an idea that, hey, go jump off a cliff, but it's an idea that interests her.
Sure.
He tells her what? What does he tell her? He says, "You would eat this fruit and you would become like God."
Yeah.
Naturally that rings a bell in someone's mind.
She was enticed by that thought.
She was enticed by greed. She was enticed by pride. And what happens is that whenever she buys into the lie, it leads her to a life of shame. She
Right.
begins to hide herself. Adam and Eve begin to hide themselves, and then they begin to play this game called blame shifting. You'll see later in the story, if you read it, Adam actually blames his wife. He says, I was just taking a nap. Why'd you make this woman? You
Yeah.
took her out of my rib. You created her. It's her fault.
Yeah.
And I think that's what happens is like I said in last episode, a lot of us, when we find ourselves buying into the lie, naturally what we want to do is we want to blame the devil. We want to blame people. We want to say, well, it's because my father was never in my life. It's because I had parents that were divorced, but we never want to take full responsibility for our actions. See, because Satan, although he does come at us, and similarly to Eve, what he does is he actually challenges her view of herself, her view of God, and her view of autonomy, the ability to discern what is right or wrong.
Right. I always had this thought of we're blaming the wrong D, and we're not blaming. We're blaming the devil, but we should be blaming our decisions.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
exactly. Exactly, man. And what's important is that similarly to this story that tells the human condition, this has actually been something that's been reoccurring all throughout centuries now. Maybe it's rooted in different ways, in different cultures, in different societies, in different parts of the world, but it's all rooted in the same idea. The devil wants to completely disorder your view of yourself, your view of God, and your view of your ethical belief system, because he knows if he can ruin the way you look at God, he'll ruin the way you live, he'll ruin the way you look at yourself, he'll ruin the way you look at people, the way you operate as a person. And so I want you to think of secularism for a minute. Secularism, it's this idea to attempt to live and operate without there being a God in society. And so ultimately what we do in secularism is we actually nullify the existence of God, and we assume that this answer to who you think you are and the answer to who you think or what you think morality should look like
Right.
is ultimately nullified, because if there's no God, then why do you matter? You have no
Sure.
purpose. You have no purpose if there's no God. There's no sense of morality, because who's to discern what right or wrong is?
Yeah.
I want you to think of it this way. If there is a creator, then there is a design. If there is a design, then there is intention. If there is, intention, then there is right or wrong. Because if there's intention, that means there's a preconceived way on how he wants to accomplish that, right or wrong. If there's right or wrong, then there is accountability. Yet what I find is that in our culture, we constantly avoid accountability like the STD.
I'm listening.
We avoid accountability. We avoid this ability to trust others with our life, with our decisions, and all these different things. And what it often does is a lack of accountability leads us a lack of pursuit toward God, pursuit of understanding ourselves, and getting a grasp of reality.
See, now, what are some ways that, because you put together a lot right there, but what are some ways that people find themselves vulnerable to buying into the lies of the enemy?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we find is that we're naturally, what we're gravitating to is this idea of spirit and truth. And I know that's more of a religious terminology that I'm using, but it's actually very much not, because when you think about it, if you have a therapist, I have a therapist that I meet with fairly often, actually. That therapist is named Mother. She's actually a licensed practitioner, and so I was able to be blessed with a therapist as a mother. But when I sit down with my mom, she resembles and embodies this ability to contain spirit and truth. And what I mean by that is that as a therapist, what she does in her job field, what she does when she talks to me, when she sits down and counsels me and helps me navigate through situations, she provides the spirit aspect that I'm desiring, because all of us, what we desire is presence.
Yeah.
We desire to be felt, to be heard, and that's found in presence. But we don't only desire presence, because you and I both know that if you're sitting in a room with some random fool, it's going to be a little sketchy, right? You, yeah, you don't want, some sex offender. You don't want his presence around you. You want someone who has truth with them. And so naturally, what we're gravitated toward as people is we're gravitating towards spirit and truth, because we want presence, but we also want to surround ourselves with people who are filled with truth. And so what I find is that as people, we actually do the opposite. So sometimes what we'll find out is that when you surround yourself with, it's almost like this idea of, in modern culture, you can't actually reference people to therapy just as much as you can't always reference people to church. Because as much as there are bad therapists, there's very bad churches out there. And so what I want to say is this, is that it's not so much found in the practice of church. It's not so much found in the practice of therapy, but it's in this ability to find a voice in your life that can provide you with that true presence, that true ability to make sure that you are heard, you are known, your voice is known, your presence is felt, but not only that, but has the ability to provide you with truth in order to navigate your life. Because here's what happens. We'll find ourselves in spots where, you surround yourself with the wrong crowd, you surround yourself with the wrong voices, and what you'll find in life is that those people, that bad community, that bad therapy, all those different things that you surround yourself with, that's a negative aspect of what the spirit and truth lies, you'll find yourself being filled with lies. People will begin to claim a identity on you, because when you surround yourself with the people that are wrong for your life, you'll begin to identify with those cultural aspects that they identify with. So maybe if you hang out with friends who are alcoholics, you might adapt that principle as being an alcoholic. If you have friends that are sex abusers and they're cheating on their spouses, that's a position you might ultimately, take on. And so it's important that we understand that, you surround yourself with people that are filled with spirit and filled with truth. Because here's what I know. Good therapy and a good church and a good community can completely transform your life. But here's the opposite end of that. Bad therapy, bad community, and a bad church, that could transform your life, but it'll transform it for the worse.
Sure. I mean, that kind of, reflects back to our first episode of our first season is, what is a Jesus community?
Exactly.
What's it look like? What's it look like to surround yourself with positive people? I mean, it sounds cliche, but you are who you surround yourself with.
You are.
It's as much as he broke it down, basically from what I said, you are who you surround yourself with. So basically, if you are a past alcoholic or current alcoholic, don't surround yourself with those kind of people.
Yeah.
Surround yourself with people who want to kind of like bring you up and tell you, hey, now let's not have that drink. Let's not do that.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, interestingly enough, I think that when we think of the community that we surround ourselves with, nobody has ever, if this has ever happened to you, I'm sure it's a rare situation, but, nobody has ever found themselves committing a deep, dark sin at 10 in the morning at a coffee shop with their pastor.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever like, hey, pastor, I'm going to meet with you at 10 in the morning at coffee, so that we can devise and like think of this nasty plot to sin. Or even on the other end, nobody wakes up on Christmas morning surrounded with their family and says, hey, what's a great idea? Let's all team up and let's just go rob a bank. Nobody does that. Nobody, and it's important to know that, because here's the thing: is if you limit the opportunity you have to sin in a
Yeah.
practical way, you limit the opportunity. I promise you'll be limiting, the output that you are giving to sin.
Right.
So I want to just say that one more time. If you limit the opportunity for sin, you will limit the outflow of sin.
That's good, I think, because, let's say you do struggle with sexual sin. Don't put yourself around those people who are going to make you sin, as I said earlier. Like, for instance, if you follow somebody on social media and they're tempting you in that way, unfollow.
Yeah.
If you got those friends who just go out and just drink, hey, let's go out tonight, let's go have a drink, don't not be friends with them, but just say no. I'm not doing that tonight, and that's probably not the best idea. So, Anthony, can you explain a little more how the devil utilizes isolation time on his playground?
Yeah. So, like we talked about a little bit earlier, when we think of isolation and idleness, it's actually the devil's main playground that he loves to play with us in. Because even think of one of the more political issues that's been uprising in our culture. We think of this issue called digital privacy. And what we find is that so many people are backlashed against this idea because they love their privacy. They don't want the government, they don't want businesses seeking through their stuff or even having the ability to know what they're searching. I mean, you might be searching some really good things. You might be looking up a counterculture podcast episode, or you might be looking up some porn. I mean, there's a teeter-totter of what you might be looking at, but I think what I find is that the human condition, what we are finding ourselves in, is when we have backlash against issues such as digital privacy. I mean, don't get me wrong. We have rights and freedom. We have rights to privacy. We do.
Sure.
We do. But what I find is that the root of that backlash isn't found in us wanting freedom for ourselves, but it's actually found in our ability to desire autonomy, secrecy, isolation, demonic ideas that we might have to search, all these things. And if we're not careful, that's actually where the devil will find us trapped when we isolate ourselves, when we have these ideas of secrecy. When you find yourself in secret, just remember, all that is eventually going to come out. And so what I want to say is that if you're able to completely, handle and approach everything that you do in secret, that is where you will completely, demolish and defeat the enemy.
I mean, there's times where we're just, like you said, we're in isolations and we don't know how to defeat the enemy.
Yeah.
But I think you're gonna answer that question right here. Let us know some practical ways we can wage war against the devil.
Yeah, the scripture found in Luke chapter 4 tells a story about Jesus. He's actually tempted by Satan. And what's interesting is that Satan, he approaches him, and it's actually a retelling. Scholars would tell you that this is a retelling of the Genesis narrative. And so the Adam and Eve story, this is basically what's going on. And it's a beautiful setting because Jesus is fasting. He's in the wilderness. Satan is approaching him and he's tempting him. And what he challenges the, placement and status of Jesus. So in other words, who Jesus is, who Jesus thinks of God as, and who and what Jesus thinks of as morality. And that's really what the devil approaches Jesus with, is challenges those three categories, similarly to how he challenges us.
Yeah.
But what I want to say is this. Jesus responds with spirit and truth because he knows the presence of God and he knows the truth of God. And so he knows the doctrine. And so what he references his favorite book in Deuteronomy. And Jesus is constantly, very calm. He doesn't come to the war with anger. He doesn't come to the war with weaponry. He doesn't come to the war with all these different things, but he actually comes with calmness. He comes with the word of God, and he comes with a knowingness and a trustworthiness that he can know and be sure of who he is, who God is, and what his belief system is. And what I want to say is this, is that Jesus, what he shows us throughout his word, throughout the Pauline epistles, throughout all of scripture, we actually know that the spiritual disciplines are the practical ways to counter the isolation and the lies of the devil. And it's with this idea of the truths of Jesus. So when you find yourself fasting, when you find yourself praying, when you find yourself in worship, when you find yourself in silence and solitude, where you strip yourself away from society and just begin to reflect on who God is, those are the moments where you begin to completely dismay all of the weaponry of Satan, all the lies, because you're canceling out all the noise and you're being able to listen to the true voice of God. I want to quote a professor. He's a professor. His name's Steve Porter, and he's from Biola University. And he speaks on the fact that we as humans are material creatures that are constantly engaging with an immaterial creator. He defines the spiritual disciplines as embodied practices or habits that you do with your mind and your body. The disciplines are embodied practices in a physical world in which we present the immaterial reality of the spirit and presence of God. And so, in simpler terms, I want to say this, is that the devil, he will lie, he will isolate, and he will deceive you. But when you find yourself buying into these lies, you will need to remember that in order to renovate your life, you must first renovate your thoughts. And so I wanted to say that again, that in order to renovate your life, you must first renovate your thoughts, because the process of renovation will require you to replace the destructive ideas in your mind with the ideas that were confined in the mind of Christ. And so it's this idea of, we want a mind of Christ. We want to think higher thoughts for our life. And so what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to replace the destructive ideas that you have that were sown in by Satan himself, and you're going to have to confine the thoughts that Christ had for you. And I want to say this, is that to trust in Jesus is to trust his ideas about reality, is to trust his mental maps to navigate you through life. It's to utilize and trust his vision to be true in your very life.
The devil, his idea is to distort his plan is to distort the idea that we have of God, ourselves, and morality. And again, isolation and bad community leads to lies, leads to unhealthy community, leads to unhealthy lifestyle. But a healthy community does lead to the truth. It does lead to, refreshness in your life. But as Anthony wrapped up his point earlier, renovating your life does begin with renovating your thoughts. Yeah. And renovating your thoughts starts with renovating your heart too.
Yeah, I just want to say this as we wrap up this episode, and just really understanding is that, through these part 1 and part 2 of this episode to kick off this season, we were able to unmask that person who is behind the evil. Yeah. And we were able to give you some practical handles of how to wage war with this enemy that is known as the devil. Because he comes at you not in these superstitious approaches where he's flattening your tires. I mean, he's not giving you these bad dreams. He might be, like I said before, but those things are tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5. His main stratagem is to truly lie to you about yourself, lie to you about God, lie to you and confuse you about your thoughts toward reality. And here's what I want to say, is that the more spirit and truth that you begin to surround yourself with, is the more you'll be able to conform yourself to Christ. But the more lies and bad community you begin to surround yourself with, is the more you'll find yourself conforming into the devil.